Theosophical teachings derive from the three fundamental ideas that we described this morning and can be summarized as boundlessness, the infinite and eternal cause of all that was, is, and will be, by cyclic movement, the eternal appearance and disappearance of all beings, and by essential equality of all beings. All beings are in their core boundless. A consequence of the three fundamental propositions is that there is nothing but life, living entities, and that there is unity in life because each being or entity is in essence that boundless and therefore is one with each and every other being. The only difference between beings is that although they all possess boundless attributes, some have brought more of these attributes to the surface than others. The seventh jewel is about unity or oneness. A human being is able to know this oneness. Why is that? Because in the core of our being, we all are one. And man can know himself. Man has developed the ability to think, to contemplate. He can study the ancient wisdom and learn to know and understand the aspects of his being. He can test it. He can test if the knowledge he gained is true by putting it into practice. He can thus develop a thorough understanding of himself. And when he knows himself, he knows all. That is the teaching of the seventh jewel, knowledge of the core of life. The Sanskrit phrasing for this jewel is Âtma Vidya. Vidya means knowledge or wisdom, and Atma means self. So this jewel is about the knowledge of self, and self with a capital S, that is the same in every being. Thus, man can build up insight in the unity and interrelatedness of all beings and realize that brotherhood is a fact in nature. But another consequence of the three fundamental propositions is that we will never be able to fully understand unity. Even the wisest sage or the noblest Buddha cannot reach a complete understanding. And the reason for that is very simple. Imagine that it would be possible to have absolute understanding of unity. Then there cannot be boundlessness. In other words, there's always growth of consciousness, of insight and understanding. And therefore, you can only know the all in a relative way. The first 5 jewels we discussed today describe the inner path of growing consciousness of all being. All beings are pilgrims on this path. But the 6th jewel helps to find the answer to this very essential question. With what motive do we follow the path of inner growth? The 6th jewel teaches us that there is a choice, and it addresses the moral implications of either choice. You can strive for inner growth for yourself because you want to free yourself from the sufferings of manifested life by achieving spiritual enlightenment. Or you can have no aims for yourself at all, but the deep wish to help your fellow pilgrims on the arduous path of evolution. Both are pilgrims on the path of inner growth that will eventually lead to the condition of spiritual enlightenment or Buddhahood. But the pilgrim whose goal was enlightenment will enter the super spiritual condition of nirvana and disappear from the stage of life. For him, spiritual development was a means to an end, whereas the pilgrim who is driven by compassion will refuse to enter that condition because it means that he cannot help his fellow beings anymore. For him, spiritual development is only a byproduct of his servitude. The Buddha for himself has in fact not overcome all feelings of separateness. The other Buddha has. He has merged into oneness. He is the Buddha of compassion because he realizes that there is unity and sees no difference between himself and any other being. He realizes that true growth can only be achieved by working for the enlightenment of all. The sixth jewel is not only inspiring, but it is also very practical, because it is now that you build the character of your thoughts and actions. And this will determine the pattern of your habits, now and in the future. So, now is the time to answer the question, why would we develop spirituality? Today we presented the jewel of reincarnation as the first jewel, and karma as the second, and so on. But the seventh jewel, the jewel of knowledge of the self, in fact contains all other jewels. The seventh jewel is their essence, their source. The wisdom of the six jewels flows forth from the seventh. Together, they are one whole that explains the very existence of the universe and its inner growth, and that of the countless beings that together form the universe. Why are we here? What is the purpose of life? What is the meaning of suffering, of death? All these questions can be answered with the seven jewels. So, what we will do now, we will give a very short summary of the seven jewels again, but this time we start with the highest, the source, the seventh. And we will show how the teaching from each jewel flows forth from the former ones and how together they make up one whole. Every being flows forth from the same source. That source one may call oneness. There are no differentiations there. There is oneness. Every being is rooted in that source and comes from it. So from that source, the multitude of beings descends. But this is just a matter of speech, because in reality, they never descend, because they always stay rooted in the source. This is the seventh jewel. And this brings us to the sixth jewel, the jewel of the two-path. From the moment the process of descending or manifestation begins, there exists duality. There is spirit and matter. The source behind it is veiled, and the purpose of life is to become aware of the underlying unity of all, to know the source and to think and act from that vision. This can be done for two reasons. You do this for your own sake, your own peace and spiritual bliss, or you do it for the sake of others. The second pilgrim doesn't have aims for himself. He is the living representative of compassion. The fifth jewel, the jewel of evolution, describes the process of becoming aware of unity, the great process of spiritual evolution that starts with the beginning of duality, where countless beings descend from the spirit into matter in order to experience and learn, and then return to the spirit enriched with the gained experience and thus better able to express their inner qualities. This process is repeated endlessly, and every time a being can evolve a little more of its boundless attributes and expands his consciousness a little more. And in this cyclic process, each being evolves these qualities in its own unique way. And that is the essence of the fourth jewel, the jewel of self-becoming. Every being always becomes exactly what it made itself, because what it becomes is always the result of its own actions. But no being can exist on its own, since everything is connected to everything. The third jewel relates to the hierarchical structure of cooperation in the universe, in which the more spiritual beings provide a world, a sphere, for the less evolved beings to live, experience and learn, and the less evolved beings provide the higher beings with a vehicle to express themselves. Every universe, whether it is an atom or a man or a solar system, is a hierarchical system of cooperating beings. And that brings us to the second jewel, the jewel of karma, or cause and effect. In every period of manifestation, these beings perform acts and influence each other. And every act will produce its appropriate result. The results become manifest in a cyclic process as well, and can effectuate in the same life or in other lives. The relations and attractions that were built on the material plane have the effect that beings will return there after the period of rest in their spiritual source. So we humans living here on Earth will come back to this planet after a period of rest that we call death. This, in a nutshell, is the wisdom of the first jewel, the jewel of reincarnation. All jewels come forth from each other. No jewel can be understood without the other ones. When you take time and study them from the point of view of the three fundamental propositions, from the idea of boundlessness, life, permeating all that is, you can recognize their value for everyday life, and when you put them into practice, they have a benevolent influence in the world. How can you start to understand the unity of all life and the resulting interrelatedness of all beings? First of all, by directing your attention to the spiritual side of existence and by imagining how life would be according to your highest view of unity. In the next workshop, we propose that you elaborate on some questions that relate to the idea of unity and interconnectedness and the motive why we should live for the unity. After this workshop, there will be a closing talk in which we elaborate upon the 6 and 7 jewels and in which we will draw important ethical conclusions. So what we would like to do now is ask you here in this room a few questions before we go to the workshops. So, who of you can give from the top of their head an example of unity and interconnectedness? April.
I would say the environmental movement.
The environmental movement
is a good example of people recognizing their interconnection to nature, that they're part of nature, part of the whole. I would say that there are numerous movements coming from all kinds of traditions that emphasize social justice, sustainability, and spirituality. And I think those three emphases are where the spiritual energy is really at on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all over the place.
Yeah.
Not just one tradition, many traditions.
And you see it in every continent, in every country.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Maybe in your own circle? Yes, you get a mic.
Well, I think one event is making a lot of folks aware of this interconnectedness more than they were before, is the disappearance of vast numbers of bees. And they suddenly realize what a large percentage of their own food supply depends on the work of the bees. Mm-hmm. Then when Mr. Putin even threatens world war if the United States continues to contribute to this problem, they can understand that it's very serious and we must take our interconnectedness seriously.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the reaction of Putin might need a little bit of adjustment, but the realization is a start. Yeah. And then, maybe this is a much harder question. We hope it is a harder question anyway. Can you find examples of situations where there is no connectedness, no unity? Difficult, eh?
There's nothing that is not connected.
Okay.
It
doesn't exist.
I guess it doesn't exist, non-existent.
Ah.
Okay. My wife and my daughter go shopping. Good disconnection. You don't need the mic for that.
That is not true. You are interconnected by your bank account.
So how come, and I give you this question, don't answer it, but take it to the workshop room with you. So how come that so many people behave as if they are not connected with anything else? Shall we go on the workshop trip?